All right, folks, I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name's Marnie Ratzel, and I'm a resource planner with Boulder County Parks and Open Space. I'm also the project manager for the Carolyn Holmberg Preserve at Rock Creek Farm Management Plan Update. I'm joined here by a number of Parks and Open Space staff that have been working on this project with me. Currently, you should also be seeing Jeff Moline. He is my manager, and he's assisting today as a moderator or an MC to help us with the second part of our meeting today, which is where you can ask questions, and the staff team is here to assist with answering those. So I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing my screen, and I will get started with the staff presentation. Just have to do a few adjustments here, bear with me. This is one of our first virtual open houses or public meetings that I can recall, certainly one of my first ones. So I'd like to again thank everyone for joining us for this virtual public meeting. The purpose today is to share an overview of the draft management plan update for the Carolyn Holmberg Preserve at Rock Creek Farm Open Space. If you're just joining us, I just mentioned we have a number of Parks and Open Space staff that are on the call. I'm gonna introduce them a little later. I'd like to just get started with the presentation. And I've got about 30 slides, I think. And I'm thinking that the presentation will be about 45 minutes because I wanna make sure that I give you a very good overview. What I'd like to do is run through the presentation and then I'll open it up for questions. What we have here today is basically it's a webinar. You should see as a participant the ability to ask a question, and you can do that by typing it, and Jeff will, serving as our moderator, he'll be able to let us know that that question has come in, and he'll work to make sure that we have a staff member answer it. If you prefer to raise your hand, you could also be given a moment when you're called on by Jeff at that time to speak your question that we can also answer. I'm also joined by our technical specialist. His name is Nick. And I'm going to take a moment and ask Nick if I covered everything and if I got everything correct. Okay, not hearing Nick, I'm going to assume that we are good to go.
Yes, you're all good to go.
Perfect. All right, so let me make sure I've got this figured out to go to my next slide. All right. So on October 19th, Parks and Open Space released and put on our website the management plan update. It's a document that is about 70 pages for the plan proper, and that does include several full-page maps that I'm going to go through most of those because I think that they really help frame our recommendations and help provide the context. When you go to the website and open up the plan, you'll see that it is a lot longer than 70 pages, and that's because there are several appendices. That includes the last management plan adopted in 2002 and a compendium of all the initial public comments that we received in response to the topics that we proposed to include in the update. So be sure to take a look at those if you want to get the full flavor. And those comments were considered in developing the plan and the proposed recommendations. So a little bit about Carolyn Holmberg Preserve at Rock Creek Farm. It's located in the southeast portion of Boulder County, and it's bordered by the city and county of Broomfield to the south and the west, and the city of Louisville up north, and the city of, as well as the city of Lafayette. Boulder County Parks and Open Space purchased the farm beginning in 1980, and it was primarily to serve as an open space buffer and for its cultural history and agricultural importance. Over the past 30 years almost, Carolyn Holmberg Preserve has remained an important plains property because of its size, its irrigable land, farmland, the important grasslands, the connection to riparian areas along Rock Creek, Stearns Lake, cultural resources, wildlife habitat, as well as public recreation access. That's important to note that this is an agricultural property, and it is one of the few open space properties in our portfolio that's managed for agricultural purposes that also provides public access. The Rock Creek Regional Trail travels through the property. There's about 3.5 miles, I think, of trail along on the property, but the Rock Creek Trail is part of a system which includes Coal Creek Trail, and that extends it's about 25 miles of trail that extends between communities. For Rock Creek, it goes from Superior all the way up to Erie, and then Coal Creek connects other communities as well. I think I'm going to try to use my cursor a little bit for you guys. So the Stearns Lake Trailhead is the primary access point for visitors who come to the property. And with everything that's happening, management of the property has become increasingly complex. And that's partially because the mission of Parks and Open Space is to conserve natural, cultural, and agricultural resources, and all of those exist on this property. And this property also provides public uses. So pretty much our whole mission and everything that we do is present at Carolyn Holmberg Preserve at Rock Creek Farm, which brings us here tonight. So when we started the management plan update, the staff team developed a proposed vision statement, and it serves as a framework to ensure that each aspect of the property is provided and maintained for both currently and for future generations. The idea is to ensure that it's a balanced, sound, informed, and sustainable land management approach and practice. What you will see in chapter 2 is the update of the property and basically both the current resources and current uses. I'm going to quickly run through some of those values that we have on the property. So starting with historic resources, the entire property is designated as a historic landmark. Actually, there's a teeny, I'll clue you in, there's a tiny bit right here that's not part of that historic designation, but the rest of the property inside of this red planning boundary is a historic landmark. And Carolyn Holmberg Preserve is rich in cultural resources. There are 18 historic resources with many historic and prehistoric sites that have already been identified. Much of the property is designated as nationally or locally important agricultural land. With the soil and water resources at Carolyn Holmberg, they lay the foundation for the presence of other natural resources and the capacity for various land uses. These include riparian, wetland, and natural communities. The 2 riparian corridors that run through the property are Rock Creek, and then tributary off of that is Buffalo Gulch that comes down to the southern portion of the property. There's some wetlands concentrated both at Stearns Lake and down here what we call Parrot's Beak, likely because it looks a little like a parrot's beak. And the significant natural communities include native grasslands, primarily in the southern areas of the property. We've got some native grasslands here and again down in that Parrot's Beak area. Critical wildlife habitat, there are 2 critical wildlife habitats that are designated on the property. The remaining, let's see, bear with me, I'm looking at my notes. So there's the 40-acre Burring Owl Preserve up here, and then the corridors of Rock Creek and Buffalo Gulch. These habitats support all sorts of raptors and migratory birds and waterfowl, as well as burrowing owls, northern leopard frogs, and more recently we've had a pair of bald eagles that have established a territory and been active in the area. They've been active in this area since about 2012, and more recently on Carolyn Holmberg itself. The property provides ample food supply, with mostly prairie dogs and other small mammals for the raptors. And there are also some oil and gas interests on the property. In the past, there have been as many as 10 well sites. Many of those are abandoned, and some of those are even plugged. The ones that are producing, there are 3 producing wells. And part of what came up during our initial public comment was more understanding around the mineral rights and who owns those. Boulder County does have some ownership, but we acquired the property with the mineral interests already under lease, and we had to accept those pre-existing leases. So ultimately, Boulder County does not have a decision-making role in the management or extraction of the resources. And we are unaware of any plans for new or refined production of mineral rights at Carolyn Holmberg. So those are all the resources that exist on the property. Chapter 2 also talks a little bit, or talks about the uses that exist on the property. One of those being the agricultural operation. Boulder County has a lease for the agricultural operation, and the current tenant has been on the property for over 20 years. It's a mix of cropland, both mostly irrigated, as well as rangeland, with some livestock grazing happening on the property. What you see here is that most of the cropland is sited in the northern part of the property, with the exception of a couple fields. And then the rangeland grasslands is mostly situated in the southern part of the property. The existing facilities at the property include both the agricultural operation, which is headquartered over on the eastern side and accessed by Highway 287. Also over on this part of the property is the Goodhue Farmhouse. And then the birds of prey have flight cages over here as well. The recreational uses really access the property primarily from South 104th Street, where the Stearns Lake Trailhead is. There also is access, some of the recreationalists come along Brainard Road. I'm sorry, this wasn't labeled. This is Brainard Road, and there is a gate where people access the trail system from. And that's one of the things I'll talk a little bit more about later on. The birds of prey also have their facilities, I think they're right here. Maybe they're down a little bit lower, but right around there, yeah.
Yep.
And that's where their intensive care unit is, and there's more of their operations on this side of the property. Let's see if I can get back down. There we go. So today, Carolyn Holmberg Preserve sees over 75,000 visits annually by recreationalists who primarily enjoy biking, hiking, and fishing. What you're seeing here is data from our 2015 5-year visitation study over in this area. And that is a statistically valid survey that tells us that visitors are most likely to be coming from Broomfield, Lafayette, and Louisville. So it is an open space that is utilized by more so the local community. So suffice it to say that management of the resources and uses on Carolyn Holmberg Preserve at Rock Creek Farm is quite complex. The updated draft management plan intends to balance the multiple uses of the property, providing staff with direction and a common vision, and will guide management direction to achieve the identified uses and values. What you're seeing on this slide is that the project team identified 13 planning issues that are outlined in the plan, and the plan outlines recommendations to refine management direction for each of these. An aim of assessing options was to define desirable and achievable management direction for any given resource in the context that considers the impacts to other resources. The 6 planning issues on the left side of the slide here are ones that really have some sort of an intersection between different resources, and therefore they really do require some degree of compromise to reduce conflict or better accommodate the varying resources and still ensure that the vision and goals of the property may be sustainably achieved. The other set of issues are really outlined from number 7 through 13 on the right side. And these were identified for refinement primarily to improve stewardship, address aging infrastructure, and adapt to increasing demand for services or just demand on the property. What I'd like to do tonight is take a few minutes to highlight the recommendations and provide more information on the items on the left side. So number 1 through 6 really, and direct you to really take a look at the plan if you have questions or want to delve a little bit further into the ones on the right. And I'm going to start off with prairie dogs. We have at least 3 topics that discuss some recommendations for prairie dogs. I think it's really 3. And so black-tailed prairie dogs are the most apparent and readily observable species at Carolyn Holmberg. They're considered to be a keynote species in the shortgrass prairie ecosystem. And one of the things that you can learn a little bit more about if you're not familiar with it is the prairie dog habitat element of the grassland and shrubland policy. I'm just going to say it's the prairie dog policy. And the prairie dog policy strives to achieve wildlife habitat protection goals while also preserving agriculture and maintaining good neighbor relations. Right there, there's a lot going on, right? So with respect to prairie dogs, our open space properties classify our land where prairie dogs exist into 3 different categories. And all 3 of those categories do exist on Carolyn Holmberg. I'm not going to go into what each of those are, at least like the definitions, but essentially you've got a habitat conservation area down here, and that's in the bright yellow. And that is where we really seek to, emphasize and maintain the prairie dog habitat. The multiple objective areas are in this, I don't know, salmon color, this orange color. And that's where you've got a mix of uses happening. A lot of that is rangeland on this property, where prairie dogs exist, and then you've got other uses that happen there as well. And then you've got the pink colors where these are designated no prairie dog. And those are essentially active agriculture and mostly cropland. To help give you some other context on that, I hope this will work, yay. Okay, I'm putting up the agricultural field types and showing you in comparison. So what we have here is the designation is multiple objective underneath the hatching here. The hatching represents the prairie dog colonies, and you can see that prairie dogs have encroached into some of the cropland that is south of that rangeland area. That is actually field 7, and field 7 is a designated preserve for prairie dog, for burrowing owls. I'm gonna go through that in a moment. the Burring Owl Preserve located on Field 7. As you can see, it's surrounded by active irrigated cropland, and that, of course, is designated as no prairie dog land. There were a handful of burring owl nests that were observed on the preserve shortly after it got designated. It was designated by the county commissioners, I think in the late 1990s. And between 2001 and 2012, there were nests for burring owls here. But the last nest occurred in 2012. And the thought is that with the agriculture all around it, the installation of a center pivot, the activities associated with the agriculture may have potentially affected the nesting activities of the burring owls. We do still have burring owls on the property, but they tend to be more recently, I should say, they have nested further to the south on the property. Another consideration is that with the fact that this is a fragmented habitat that doesn't have any contiguous ability for, well, for instance, for prairie dogs or for the burring owls to move to other parcels, that's another potential reason why it's not being as utilized as it has in the past. So I am delving into our first topic, which is the designation and use of the 40-acre preserve. And the plan outlines recommendations for the preserve, with the recommendation being that Field 7, which is the Prairie Dog Preserve, that the land designation be changed to have this become part of the agricultural operation and become cropland in the future. And in order to support or better support prairie dogs, the idea is that Field 65, which you're seeing here as rangeland, also has had some cropland on it and had some cultivation. The idea would be to discontinue crop production down here on Field 65, as well as to defer livestock grazing in support of recovering the grassland and the plant communities. And then allowing prescriptive grazing in the future, but discontinuing that crop production. So as part of removing the prairie dogs, as part of the designation to NPD cropland up here on Field 7, the prairie dogs that do exist on this parcel today would be relocated to suitable areas within the Boulder County land portfolio. All right, our second topic that does have some relationship to prairie dogs is grassland health and restoration. The objective is to improve the health and ecosystem function of the grasslands. We have a very valuable and limited resource at Carolyn Holmberg Preserve, and that is that we have intact native grasslands. And these are located in the HCA area of the what's identified as Field 42. This area is designated as a habitat conservation area, and the grasslands here have never been plowed or tilled. So we have some pretty good grassland that we want to protect. There also are some native remnants that exist south of Buffalo Gulch, southeast of Buffalo Gulch within Field 55. Although there are other rangeland fields that contain grasslands, they're in fair condition throughout the property. And that is intrinsically because of the relationship of having prairie dogs that have some impacts on the land, as well as livestock grazing, which also is an impact, but to a bit of a lesser extent. So what do? We want to maintain each of these things. We want to maintain the species, and yet we need to make some changes for the health of the land and to better manage. So we've come up with a set of recommendations based by field that seeks to understand what the vegetation type is, looks at what the adjacent uses on the property, and any natural barriers. And let's see if I've got this right. Yep, okay. So we identified a range of options. I mean, in order to reestablish the grasslands or to give those native grasslands a rest, the team looked at a range of options for both prairie dog management and livestock grazing management. For prairie dogs, we looked at keeping things the way it is, all the way to full removal of the species of prairie dogs. Ultimately, we didn't think either of those were viable alternatives. And so we considered, maybe doing some removals, and ultimately said, I'll go through the ultimate in a minute. With livestock grazing, same thing, status quo or eliminating livestock grazing, and considering a prescriptive plan. So I'm kind of revealing my poker hands, and that is that we have established that our recommendation is to investigate removing some number of prairie dogs via trapping. And the intention would be to decrease the density of prairie dogs and maintaining smaller populations to allow the vegetation to reestablish. We do recognize that this strategy is going to require careful monitoring to ensure that there are adequate number of prairie dogs, both to establish the grasslands, but also to ensure that prairie dogs remain on the landscape, and to ensure that we maintain their social structure, which we know is important to their survival. So with respect to livestock grazing, we're looking to temporarily defer grazing until the plant community recovers, and then to have an adaptive management approach that would include annual coordination. We would meet collectively as a team to look at what the prescribed grazing plan what prescribed grazing might be supported. That would be after a 2 to 5 year respite while we establish those grasses. The third item that has to do with prairie dogs is prairie dog management. What the plan reaffirms is to maintain the current NPD, MOA, and HCA lands. So that would be no prairie dog, multi-objective area, and HCA land designations. The exception being Field 7, as I described already, with that change in number 1. In addition to that, what we heard from stakeholders was that there's concern for prairie dogs encroaching onto adjacent private properties. So to address that, the recommendation is to install barriers along the northern side of Field 44. And there actually is a prairie dog barrier here along the south of 42, of Field 42, adjacent to Lacamora. But we could use we have some deferred maintenance, and we would complete that to ensure that that barrier is more effective. The plan, let's see, planning issue number 4 regards riparian health, and the plan recommends changes to the management of livestock grazing here as well in the riparian corridors. Because of the availability of water resources, forage within the riparian area tends to be more productive and dependable, and there's some water there. However, a priority within riparian corridors is preserving wildlife habitat and plant communities. So these areas can do that, and they also can provide some forage during certain times of the year to the extent that the riparian habitat is preserved. So similar to the grasslands, the recommendation is to remove grazing in a couple areas where we have done some past restoration projects for those riparian areas. And now those are circled here. Field 78 and field 66 are those areas where we really want to remove grazing. And the rest of the riparian corridors, we would establish a prescriptive grazing plan that could be supportive of both the grazing and the riparian habitat and plant communities. Okay, I'm going to transition now. There are two more topics to on that left part of the screen where there was the intersection. And these two topics, I should say, trails and trailheads, there are recommendations for those, and they're contained under both recommendations for wildlife closures to the regional trail, as well as recommendations for recreation, visitor access, and accessibility. So bringing you back to the existing conditions on our property, the Rock Creek Regional Trail goes through, and there are a couple places where we have that seasonal wildlife closures have prompted closures of that regional trail. And I'm going to go through those each here with the recommendations. So wildlife closures of the regional trail east of 104th Street. We actually have one in place right now. It started on October 15th, and that is due to a pair of bald eagles that may be establishing a nest. So we want to support those breeding activities. And so this portion of the trail is currently closed. This seasonal closure, if the birds nest and are successful, we could be looking at a closure that could go as late as July of this year. So we think that there needs to be some alternatives for flexibility in the system and maybe redundancy. So the proposal is to look at a trail along South 104th Street. It's also important to note the recommendation is to, we always consider the protections of wildlife. We work collectively with CPW and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in relation to recreation, agricultural operations, and our regional trails when they are within the areas where the breeding is occurring. So the recommendation is to, if the bald eagles do nest adjacent to the trail, we would continue to have a temporary detour like we have done this year, and also explore the feasibility of relocating the trail to be along South 104th Street from where it enters the property all the way up to Stearns Lake. And that would not only serve that purpose of the flexibility in the system, but it would better accommodate increased demand for recreational access along 104th Street. There's also long-term utilization by burrowing owls, as I mentioned before, and they have the nesting activities has prompted closures of the cradleboard trail on occasion. And most recently, that occurred in 2018 and 2019 because of the location of those nests. So a long-term solution is needed to ensure safe alternative for the regional trail during the extended closure. And the recommendation is to develop a trail along the north property boundary west of 104th to Brainard that could be utilized year-round as another access to the property. Let's see, the other thing I'm going to talk about here is there's another, do I have another slide on here? I do, okay. So there is the potential, we're also recommending a potential future trail along a historic railroad bed on the property. And that's what you're seeing in the orange line. The property is a local destination in addition to serving that regional purpose, and it attracts visitors from nearby residential and commercial areas. And there's a desire for a loop trail. In addition, when the Cradleboard Trail in the future, if it were to be closed, a number of folks would likely walk or bike up and down Brainard. And that's happening today as well. At the moment, well, I guess what I should say is that this trail alignment is fairly expensive. It includes 2 crossings of both of Rock Creek and I think another drainage. And we're not sure if the demand warrants that kind of investment at this time, but we do want to reserve this corridor as a potential future connection. So that's the recommendation here. Okay. Number 6 is recreation, visitor access, and accessibility. And I'd like to talk a moment about a couple trailhead improvements that are recommended. We recognize that many visitors come to Rock Creek Farm and Carolyn Holmberg by foot or on bike, but there's also there's need for additional parking. In particular, there is no formal equestrian parking at the moment. And the primary access point at Stearns Lake, you've got a few ways that equestrians might park, but what happens also is that in peak periods, you could see upwards of 15 vehicles parked out on the road because there isn't enough parking in the parking lot. So we are proposing 2 different remedies for that. And that's partially because of the way that Carolyn Holmberg is accessed. South 104th Street terminates here at the property. And to get over to the other side over here at Brainard is another difficult challenge. So we're recommending that an additional trailhead be developed at the south end of 104th Street. And this one would explore providing up to 4 horse trailer parking spaces, as well as some additional vehicle parking. There's also a need here to just improve what's happening down here. You've got a farm road and the trail, and it just looks like a lot's happening. So looking to redesign that to improve and help users understand where the trail is. And then looking to improve the connection over here from Brainard Road. Currently at Brainard Road, it is it's a little unsafe sometimes because there's not a formal parking lot. It is used as one, and during inclement weather, it can get pretty muddy and folks can get stuck in there. So we know that demand is there, and we'd be looking at maybe a 10 to 15 vehicle parking lot and a visitor kiosk. Due to the topography here, we wouldn't be looking to do it right where the existing location is, but likely a little bit to the north or possibly a little bit to the south, based on looking at what is practical from an engineering perspective and from that landscape perspective. Okay, that is the 6 topics that were the intersections between many. I'd love it for you to take a closer look, not just at the recommendations, but take a look at chapter 2 as well. That explains and helps you understand everything that's happening on the property. And you can view that at the link that I'm showing here. And I'm going to show you what the next steps are and then open up the floor for questions. In terms of sharing your input, as we get to questions, we really are hoping to help you understand, or any clarifying questions or any questions about the recommendations. for your input, we are asking for you to use the online comment form and provide your comments in writing. That helps ensure that it's part of the public record. And it also helps each stakeholder see what's happening and what everybody's thinking, because there's a lot of different values and a lot of different interests here. So it's hugely helpful and really vital to the public process. It also allows our decision makers to see in real time what people are saying and to see that feedback. So the next steps are, after tonight, we'll be bringing the plan to the Historic Preservation Advisory Board. Their purview is specific really to those cultural and historic resources, and that input is going to be focused on those resources. We'll be presenting the plan to them as an information item. What that means is that it does not include a public hearing with testimony from the public. That's not to say you can't provide comments to them or share comments around that. They just won't have that as part of their meeting. Then on Thursday, so that's November 5th. A couple weeks later, on November 19th, we'll be presenting to the Parks and Open Space Advisory Board. This will be a public hearing, and the board will be taking the committee will be taking action to provide a recommendation to the Boulder County Commissioners. We are requesting that if you'd like your input to be shared with the POSAC as part of the presentation, that you could provide that feedback to us by November 9th, and we'll be able to cover that. Of course, you also have the opportunity to speak at the meeting as well. Then December 15th is where the county commissioners will consider adopting the plan, and we will be receiving input and comments on the plan up until that meeting. Preferably, if you'd like to have your input incorporated into the presentation to the commissioners, we'd like to receive that by December 7th. But that all of the comments that are submitted online will be viewable by each other and by the commissioners and the decision makers up to and including that meeting. So I will leave you with my contact information. Be sure to also look at the website, because that is your best resource. And it's where you can find out how to register, what's happening with the meetings. At the moment, and I think for the future for all of these meetings, they will be virtual. So your best bet is to do something like you've done today by signing on to Zoom. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I'm done. Let's see, I guess I'm just going to reiterate one thing in my notes, which is that we're not officially recording your comments that you would speak verbally today as part of public input tonight. So I will once again just stress and encourage you to submit written comments using the web page. But we are all here to answer any questions and to have any dialogue you'd like to have. And now I have to figure out how to turn this off.
I'm there. We've gotten so far, I think maybe 3 questions plus 2 more. And if you'd like, I could go over those, Marnie.
Sure, that would be great.
Okay. And a couple of them came in, and I started to type out some answers. And what I've learned from our staff is that those answers might not be able to be viewed by everyone. So I'm going to just repeat the questions and then start off with the answers. And I'm going to let our staff know that I need them to be on deck to help finish answering some of these questions. So
sure.
I'm going to request that Amy Schwartz be ready to answer a question about Field 7 and prairie dogs, and then Trent or Rob a question that I'm going to repeat right now, and then I'll mention my starting answer, and then Rob maybe can finish. So first question was, from Jeremy Gregory. What are the crops being grown around Field 7? Are any of these areas surrounding Field 7 and then overall on the property organic regenerative cultivation operations? I started to answer and I said that, oh, and I see Rob has already answered. That's great. So I'll just read those. Surrounding Field 7, it's corn and pumpkins. And then Rob has mentioned that the tenants also raise wheat, barley, alfalfa, and grass for hay. Crops are rotated and the same crop is generally not grown in consecutive years. The tenants have considered organic production, but have not initiated organic production. They're currently in the process of transitioning away from GMO corn. I should mention that Rob Alexander is our senior agricultural specialist for the department. So that is the answer to that first question. The second question that we received was also from Jeremy Gregory. When you say trapping prairie dogs, does this mean trapping to relocate or trapping to kill them? And I started by saying the department's management of prairie dogs system-wide includes trapping to relocate and trapping for donation to raptor and ferret programs. The trapping at Field 7 would be a relocation. Those prairie dogs, as Marnie mentioned, would be relocated to another part of our county system. But then I also wanted to make sure that people understood that our overall prairie dog management program does include lethal control as well. And our lead wildlife technician that works with prairie dog management is Amy Schwartz. Do you want to add anything, Amy, to that?
No, actually, you covered pretty much everything in those regards. Unless someone is speaking outside of Field 7.
And Jeremy Gregory could see if we could see if he wanted to ask more than that. Maybe he'll type in a second question. I'm getting more. I'll keep moving for now, and we'll come back if we get more answers or questions about that. So the next question was from Trace Baker. In the slide on historic resources, there was a phrase on isolated finds, and the question was, could I give some examples? And I can. So isolated finds are usually small items that aren't associated with a recognized a site. So something that, for example, would be an isolated find would be perhaps a stone tool that was recovered from a part of the property, but that it wasn't associated with some larger accumulation of resources that would designate it as a site, as a historic site. So that's an example for that. Now I've got to go. So those are the questions. Now we got 8 more that have opened up here that I haven't been able to answer at all. So here we go. First one is from Ruby Bowman. How many prairie dogs are currently in Field 7? And when was the last prairie dog count done by county wildlife biologists? Amy, do you want to take that one on?
Yes, no problem. We actually have not done a count as this is just coming up. Once we are ready to do a relocation or have discussed that and have the plan set out, we will do above ground counts and other biological assessments in that 40-acre preserve.
Okay. All right, let's see. The next one was from Theo Kuhn. The proposed trailhead and parking lot at the end of 104th Street is within a quarter mile of an active bald eagle nest. And even if the eagles chose not to nest there going forward, it will remain an active nest by CPW's definition for the next 5 years. How do you plan to follow CPW recommendations in pursuing this project, given that CPW's 2020 Raptor guidelines recommend against new surface occupancy with a quarter mile of an active nest? This is a great question. Let's see, is this, in terms of answering this, would this be something that Therese Glowacki, our resource management manager, might want to take on? Because I think she's sitting in for our wildlife biologist. Is that right, Therese?
Sure. So what we would do is we would consult with CPW on the location of that parking lot. And yes, we do understand that they want to reduce the impact within a quarter mile of existing nests. I think part of the discussion certainly would be, are there other nests around there? Actually, I haven't done a measurement to see how far it is from its former nest. Yeah, we would have to look into all of that before we make a final decision on installing that parking lot there.
Yep. All right, thank you very much, Therese. Let's see, next question is from Pamela Wanick. In the critical wildlife habitats map where prairie dogs are occupying that area, why aren't these designated as HCAs? So let's see, Marnie, is there any chance you can pull up the critical wildlife habitats map?
Yep, just give me a moment.
Sure. And then I might check with staff. Is there anybody on our staff who would like to take a crack at answering that one?
Yeah, this is Rob, and maybe Therese can weigh in on this as well as in Amy if I don't cover something. But we have criteria by which we designate prairie dog habitat as HCA. And in the quick and simple answer is those particular fields don't fit the criteria for an HCA. As you can see, the HCA up on the hillside is native grassland. It's the only native grassland on the property. It's large, relatively large. The boundaries don't border neighbors or cropland that have, where there's potential conflict. Those are some of the criteria and the reasons that those fields aren't designated as HCA.
All right. Anybody else on our staff want to add anything to that one? All right, maybe not for right now. I'll go to the next one. This is great, people. I really appreciate the public attendees using this question and answer tool. This is helpful for me. So please keep these good questions coming, folks. Trace Baker asks, I'm just working my way down chronologically here. Trace Baker asks, are the isolated finds always prehistoric or can they be more recent? I believe that they can be more recent. We don't have our cultural resource staff here tonight to confirm that, but we can do that. We can get that answer.
And I'll just add on that one of the things that you saw on the slide was that only 39% of the property has been surveyed, and under the cultural and paleontological resource recommendations, it is to complete a full assessment, a survey of both the cultural resources and the paleontological resources. And those finds will help us determine and develop a strategic plan to preserve and protect what we find.
Great. Next question from Pamela Wanick. How would thinning occur without damaging the social structure of the prairie dog colony? I have 25 years of field experience with prairie dogs, and thinning is not proven to be effective. In fact, it could exacerbate the problem. Could we potentially look into more, could we potentially look more into restricting expansion? Prairie dogs can regulate populations via less successful births, etc., within stabilized areas. So I think those are That's good comments and questions. I think so. One of the questions for our staff, and maybe Therese, this would be for you again. Do we have an understanding of how thinning could occur without damaging a social structure? Is that something you want to take a crack at, Therese?
Yeah, I think that we know that thinning is disruptive to the social structure of the prairie dog colonies. Our problem is, if you look at the map that Marnie is showing, there is no place for us to restrict expansion because the hashed areas on her map are occupied areas. So the whole habitat conservation area in the southeast is already occupied by prairie dogs. So that's our issue, is we just have too many prairie dogs. But Pam, we would love to talk to you about, I mean, what's a realistic way to reduce them? Do we just target the outside edges and keep them out of the outside edges? Those are things that we certainly would like to talk to you about.
Great. Thank you very much, Therese. Let's see, next one, I'm hoping I'm keeping these straight. Next one is from Dana Bovey. I have spoken to quite a few stakeholders, and the consensus is that there needs to be additional time for public comment. Many Boulder County residents have been displaced by wildfires and are therefore unable to participate in the entirely virtual stakeholder feedback process. Across Colorado, COVID-19 cases are at their highest levels yet and continuing to rise. And the upcoming election on November 3rd, squarely in the middle of this timetable, is occupying the civic energy of many Coloradoans. Aspects of the plan need to be accounted for. Need to be accounted for by Cora requests. How can we justify the time frame? I'll attempt to answer that, and Marnie can chime in. We've tried to stick with this timeline, and I guess our sense is that we've given folks 3 weeks of time to review the document, and then we'll head into the public process schedule, which gives people an opportunity to comment from now all the way until the middle of December, when the public hearing will be held for the county commissioners. We don't feel the plan is necessarily of such length that it for example, when you compare to like an environmental resource analysis for a federal project that has thousands and thousands of pages of materials, for example, the Gross Reservoir Project, which has 16,000 pages of information. So we are not in any way trying to diminish the experience and the hardships faced by people. Our sense is that I guess we believe people are going to be able to successfully meet these guidelines, and we can continue to talk with stakeholders and public to make sure that that's true. All right. And feel free to provide us comments if on these answers. Let's see. So I'm moving down the line here. Unless anybody else on our staff would like to address anything. Let's see. I think I'm down to, let's see, maybe the last one. This is from Donna Bushing. If you remove prairie dogs from field 7 and relocate prairie dogs out of the Carolyn Holmberg Rock Creek Farm and thin the population in 68, how can you be sure that there'll be enough prey for hawks and eagles? Amy or Therese, would one of you like to answer that one?
Yeah, sure, no problem. If we removed all of the 40-acre preserve, last year via prairie dog colony mapping, we have 505 acres. So that would, not really take out very much of the actual property, especially depending on how many actual animals are in the 40-acre preserve.
Okay. All right, anybody else from our staff want to say anything on that one, or we have that one covered?
Well, I would just add that In 2020 at Rock Creek Farm alone, we have 144 acres of acres of prairie dogs on habitat conservation area and 313 in MOAs. So again, just reinforcing what Amy said.
Okay, great. Thanks, Amy and Therese. Let's see. So I just have one more question that's open in the, oh, nope, I got another one too. Okay, good. Again, these are great questions and comments, people. Thanks for sending them out and keep them coming. We still have another hour. So let's see. This one is, it's kind of a question comment. Oh, excuse me, who's it? This is from Pamela Wanick. I have one more question. Has Boulder County seen Kiss the Ground? It's a movie about regenerative farming. And I haven't, but let's see if either Trent or Rob, have you heard about this movie about regenerative farming?
This is Rob Alexander. I'll let Trent speak for himself. I have not, Pam, but I will check it out. Of course, we've seen and investigated and been involved in a lot of regenerative farming, and there's a lot more to be seen. So we'll check it out. Thank you.
Rob, would you, and is the Mad Ag Project looking at some of that sort of stuff that we're involved in, or not as much?
The Mad Ag Project is our kind of approach to helping our farmers who have been raising Roundup Ready sugar beets and corn in transitioning away from those crops. So basically, we've hired consultants, and they're working with our tenants to find alternatives, and that involves other crops and regenerative farming practices as well.
Okay.
And they are doing some regenerative farming.
Great, thanks. That kind of answers this next question, this next comment that came from Jeremy Gregory, which he said, something to consider is raising the standards of ag cultivating. So I think perhaps this Mad Agriculture program that we're looking at is one of the ways that we could be doing that. So, all right.
If I could I just want to pipe in as well.
Oh yeah, please, Therese.
Boulder County is also engaged in a carbon farming research project. It's a 5-year project where we are coordinating with the Natural Resources Ecology Lab at CSU, and we have experiments on the ground that are helping look at some changes in agricultural practices that help us increase carbon sequestration in our agricultural lands, increase water holding capacity, and better crop production. So that's another very large investment and project that we're working on with regard to regenerative ag.
All right. Thank you. Let's see, we got 2 more that just came in. The next one's from Theo Kuhn. A follow-up to Donna's question. The management plan asserts that there is ample prey for nesting bald eagles, given that the draft plan recommends reducing prairie dog populations in almost all of the property's prairie dog colonies, including MOAs and HCAs, and given there is no upper limit in the prairie dog policy on the amount of prairie dogs that can be removed, how can our department assure that there will be ample prey for the nesting eagles under the new plan? Amy or Therese, you want to give that one?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, Theo. Of course, as our planning kind of moves forward, we'll be addressing a lot of those situations. One step at a time. I think the 40-acre preserve would likely be the first thing on the docket, just as far as relocations go. It's extremely complex and complicated. We're talking several years just for that portion alone. And as far as thinning or any kind of other control on HCAs or MOAs, again, that would be discussed along with several of our other wildlife biologists to address the eagles and other hawks that live there. I also like to point out there are quite a few other prairie dog colonies in adjacent areas, as well as Broomfield just across 287. So I don't think we'd necessarily limit the food source too heavily for those eagles.
Great, or good, thank you, Amy. Let's see, moving on to the next one. This is from Dana Bovey again. The proposed, this one will be probably best answered, at least start maybe with you, Marnie. The proposed railroad grade trail, so that's the one that's kind of east of Brainard Drive that we've kind of reserved for the potential future use. Let's see, Dana says, will also be in close proximity to burrowing owl nest and is in the middle of an area where the nesting eagles often hunt. How does this make sense? So in other words, just that this would have some considerable wildlife impacts, I think. And so how did we talk through that in the management plan team discussions?
Yeah, sure. You know, the exploration of it would consider more around the proximity. You know, the Cradleboard Trail is currently subject to closures due to the burrowing owls, and the flexibility in the system would, by having well, first of all, let's see, do I share my screen? Sorry, I'm looking at this, but you're not. Can you see this now?
Yep.
Okay, so the green line is proposed to offer that flexibility in case there are closures of the Cradleboard. You know, I don't know if Therese can speak to exactly where burrowing owls have nested in the past. I'm not sure that we've seen them within this vicinity. It's not something that really came up relative to being in close proximity of that potential trail in the future. I'd also like to just point out that the reserving this is a desire to be able to take some folks off of Brainard if need be, but that's not something that we just don't envision that happening anytime in the next probably 10 years. So a lot can happen during that time. Therese, is there anything you can share about the relative proximity of the burrowing owls?
Yeah, can you go back?
Yeah, sorry.
So on this map, the burrowing owls have nested near the Cradleboard Trail, the red line on the map. So the thought process of having an alternative trail, having an additional trail that one would serve as a loop for visitors, but also, for example, if the burrowing owls nested again along the red trail where they have in the past, we could route the public along the yellow line and down the new trail so that they would provide a larger buffer for the burrowing owls. If, for example, the bald eagles decided to nest along the drainage right there that bisects the proposed trail, then we would close the proposed trail and the bald eagles nest would still be protected by using the Cradleboard Trail or the northern trail, whichever, depending on where on the property they nested. So we're looking at that as giving a potential areas that we could close trails and still protect the burrowing owls or the eagles.
All right. Thank you. Moving on to the next question, I'm going to need a little bit of clarification from the person that asked the question, and that's Dana Bovey. The word, I'm not familiar with this word, and it might be a misspelling. So, Dana, maybe you can re-ask the question. Does our department plan to afford spatial protections for, and I don't know if it's special or spatial, protections for juvenile and adult eagles during the post-fledge dependence period that can last 6 to 8 weeks post-fledge? So maybe spatial, okay, thank you. So does our department plan to afford spatial protections, so like buffers for juvenile and adult eagles during the post-fledge dependence period that can last 6 to 8 weeks after fledging. Therese, you want to answer that one?
Yeah,
Or
what
talk
we
about
do
that?
is, yeah, we follow the CPW guidelines. And it actually, in this case, with the current trail closure, CPW's current guidelines, unfortunately, they were changed and they start December 15th, but we are respecting previous guidelines to afford the nest building, the eagles the nest building time, and hopefully have them successfully build their nest. So our current closure is October 15th, and we keep it closed through the end of July. So depending on when they nest and when they fledge, part of that period would be covered, but perhaps if they fledge late, CPW guidelines say basically August 1st is safe to allow people to use the trails again. So I would say we would follow CPW guidelines for that.
Great, thanks very much, Therese. Next question. I think it's a question, but I guess this probably was in response to some previous comments that we made. So Donna Bushing says, but MOAs allow removal of up to 99% of prairie dogs, and then there will be no HCAs for prairie dogs. I'm wondering if maybe she was commenting on the discussion that we were talking about in terms of ample prey and would there be prey enough left. And I guess the one thing I would say is there still will remain HCAs on the property. So we're not changing any, we're not changing any HCA, or we are changing the one HCA spot. We're not, sorry.
No, the Prairie or the Burring Owl Preserve is not an HCA.
Okay, I'm sorry.
The
Thank you.
HCA is south of the railroad tracks.
That's right.
Between the railroad tracks and Lacamora, and that will remain.
Okay. So I think we've answered that one.
I think,
Go. Yeah.
I think part of her question was just speaking of the MOAs where there is no rule per se that does not allow 99% or more removal. We have only probably ever done that once or twice in the past 20 years. And it was very specific to a full revegetation project. Nothing quite this large. So we would not end up removing large amounts on MOAs regardless on Rock Creek Farm. It's too stable of a property itself.
And then I think what I to further respond to that is, part of the range of options that was considered relative to prairie dogs and restoring the grasslands was either rolling removals or complete removal, with the concept being that the recommendation is to thin to ensure that that prairie dogs do continue to be part of the landscape and part of the habitat that's there.
Let's see. So we got a couple more questions. One that's just related to this, again from Dana. Then why not put an upper limit on removals on MOAs at Holmberg at a minimum? And I guess I would say that's a comment that we can consider and respond to, unless somebody else has a question or thought from our staff.
I would just add that is not something that we have ever considered, and I think when we do a prairie dog management update, that certainly could be something that we consider. It would be a good, robust discussion about the status of MOAs. I do want to reiterate what Amy said, that we have never been able to remove. We have never either desired or accomplished removal on MOAs except in one or two very limited situations. Jeff, there's another comment above that one.
Yeah, there's two other ones.
Okay.
I got two other ones. Let's see. So let's see the next. Oh, that you can answer. Do you want to just take it?
Well, the question about the county, when the county does restoration on field 65, will prairie dogs be removed by lethal control from this field? I think we have to determine how many prairie dogs are out there that need to be removed on field 65. We haven't made a restoration plan yet. And yeah, so I wouldn't commit that we have to remove prairie dogs there before we start the restoration process on field 65. We may get creative and see how we can balance, you know, existing prairie dogs out there with restoration.
Okay. And then working back up just for a second here, Dana had a question. Where he mentioned that the nose of the railroad grade could be within 250 meters of where the burrowing owls recently nested. So I think that'd be something we would take a look at for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now let's see, we're now down to, let's see, a last one from Dana here. Therese, then if the removal on MOAs has always been low, then how can we use past nest productivity records to justify prairie dog removal on MOA at Holmberg that has no limits?
So what I would say is that our plan for prairie dog removal on MOAs is not to remove them all at Carolyn Holmberg Preserve. That has not been part of the discussion. Our proposal is to reduce the number of prairie dogs out there, not to remove them on MOAs. So I don't think we have any, there's no plan, and I don't think that we've considered that at all.
Okay.
And I just typed a response. Donna Bushing had mentioned that it's hard to see the difference in color on the map.
Oh, okay,
between, say, an MOA. So it is something that we can refine and talk about how to better distinguish the colors of the prairie dog designations.
All right, so that is all the open questions that we got. Those were all really good questions and some comments, and I really appreciate people jumping on the virtual meeting bandwagon here and asking questions through that Q&A button down there. So very much appreciate people. Dana says thanks. So yeah, thanks for playing along with this virtual meeting format that we're all still kind of learning. So I really appreciate you all. Let's see, we were scheduled to go to 6:30. Are there any other questions or things people want to talk about? We still have time and staff here, if you have other questions. We really appreciate, like I said, your participation.
And I'm just putting my screen up again with the next steps and the upcoming meetings. Of course, this is posted on the project webpage as well, or the plan webpage. And it is your best resource for any updated information as well. Jeff, we do have a question that's come in.
Yeah, about the current nest. Can we discuss that now? I think we probably could. A question about the current nest. Do we have a staff person that could answer some questions about that? Current bald eagle nest?
I think the best resource might be Therese. I'm not sure what the question is.
Oh, maybe Dana can either ask his question verbally or just type a question and we'll get to it. In the meantime, I got another one here. Tamar Krantz. I was curious about the juvenile bald eagle. It is not related to the plan, but is it related to the adults? Maybe somebody's seeing a juvenile bald eagle at the out at Stearns and is wondering what its relationship is to adults. We might, some of these questions you might have to ask one of our staff directly, maybe with an email, and we can get back to you on some of these specific questions, perhaps.
Yeah, I would funnel that question to Marnie and she can send it over to our raptor biologist.
Okay.
Happy to do that. Let's put that
And-
up there.
And then Dana replied, Therese, do you see that?
Yeah, I think that it would be appropriate, Dana, just for you to send, yeah.
Yeah, well, those are good questions, and we'll if you make we can take them from here, and Marnie can get them to the appropriate staff people. I believe we'll be able to save these questions and comments. So, all right. I think we've gotten through them all again. It's kind of funny how it ebbs and flows here, but yeah, I think we've gotten them. Do you have does anybody on our staff want to add anything? Any things that came up during these questions that we would might be helpful for the public to know at this time? Marnie, do you want to have anything you want to say either?
No, not really. Nothing comes to mind.
Okay.
I think that is perhaps a wrap. We've lost, let's see, a number of attendees.
Yeah, we've still got 9 people.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we've as you noted, we've really sort of gotten through what we wanted to do a presentation and then have staff available here to answer questions and receive some of your initial comments here. I think we've kind of gotten through everything, and if nobody has anything else, we might be able to finish a little early and let people get to dinner in their evenings. Yeah. So thank you all, staff included. Thank you, staff, for being here and helping with this. I thought, boy, I think we're getting good at these virtual meetings. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Marnie. This was really your meeting. So thank you so much.
I second that. Thanks to everyone who joined us from staff, and for Nick for all of his support on this. And thank you for participating tonight.